Everybody, and welcome to Using Articles in Embroidery Software. I'm your host today, Emily Hall, and we are joined today by BERNINA educator Debbi Lashbrook. If you have questions for Debbi during the presentation, please type them into the questions box. We'll have a short question-answer session at the very end on questions that pertain to the webinar. We do have two handouts that are provided in the handouts section, so make sure you download those today. If you don't get a chance to download those, they'll be available on BERNINA.com in a few days. If you're viewing on an Apple product, your screen might look a little different. You might have to swipe left or right to either view Debbi or the presentation. And then in the More section, if you click on that button, that's where the handouts are located. And if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, the best thing to do is please exit the webinar, close your internet browser, and reopen the webinar. Don't worry if you miss any part of it, it's being recorded and we will get that uploaded for you as soon as we can. So now I'd like to welcome Debbi and we will begin our presentation. Hi, Debbi.
Hi, Emily. Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. And okay, there's the show my screen. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be about using articles in embroidery software. But before I get started with the class, I wanted to just announce that there has been an added class to our online classes. So we're going to have an introductory software class that is February 1st and 2nd. So you can go to the website and learn about that. It is for software 8 or 9. You can use either software. You can also use the trial version if you want to just kind of take a dip into the software and see what it's all about. So on to the webinar. We're going to talk about what is an article, and I'm going to talk about the versions of software that will use articles, how articles can be used in the software, all the different types of articles, how to import an image that you want to use as an article, and different things that you can capture, different ways you can capture custom articles or actually images to use as custom articles. And then once they're in the software, how do you size them accurately? And then we'll talk about a few other options for that you can use for backdrops in creating your designs. So first of all, what is an article? An article is any item that can be used in the background of a design for the purposes of planning, positioning, and sizing your designs. They can be household items, they can be garments, they can be patterns, they can be all sorts of different things. And articles are built into the software, but you can scan anything that you really want to scan and use that in the software to plan and prepare your design. Now, they can be saved to use as a custom article, or another option is you just use the image as a backdrop. And you don't necessarily have to save that in the case of just using it as a backdrop. So for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to use 3 terms. An article would be an image that is saved and inserted into the software to use as an article. When I say backdrop, I mean that that's just an image that you insert into the software to use specifically for that file. And then when I refer to a background image, it can be, that's more of a general term. It can be either an article or a backdrop. So those are kind of my definitions that I'm using for the purpose of the webinar. So an advantage of using an article versus using an image as a backdrop would be that custom articles can be saved and easily accessed in the software at the proper size. Articles are always in the background and you don't have to move them to the start of a design like you would, for example, a placement line. They can't be selected and moved. When you bring an image into the background, a design, you can accidentally select it and move it. And then you have to kind of undo that. And it's always best to lock your backdrops. so you don't accidentally move them. And articles can be recalled later, so resizing steps don't have to be repeated. When you just bring an image into the software, you can resize it, of course, but then you have to go through some extra steps to save it outside that particular design. So the advantage of using articles is that it definitely will save time and save you a few steps. Now, the versions that have articles, we first got them in version 7, Version 8 added a few different articles. And then in version 9, it's important that articles are only available with Designer Plus level. So if you have creator level, or you're thinking about creator level, you would have to bring an image in and use as a backdrop, because articles are not possible for you, but you can certainly take advantage of using an image in the background to develop your designs. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how articles and background drafts help you. So anything that you use as a background image, it will help you choose the proper place for the design and place it on the item where you want it to be. It also helps you size the design and look at the proportions of the actual image in the background, so you can get a better sizing. Then it will help you rotate the design. Is it okay to use the design as is, or do you need to rotate it more, in either to the right or the left to maybe align with the style line that is in the background image that you're using? And then lastly, it will help you accurately stitch the design in the proper place. So these are all different ways that images can help you with your designing. Now, to add an article, you can go to the design menu and you select background and colors, and this display opens up. If you're using something that's built in, you go to factory article, and then you select the type of article that you want from this drop down. And then after you choose your article, you can change the color of the article and click OK. There are all sorts of built-in articles. You can do home deck items, you can have caps, you have kids clothing, ladies clothing, and menswear. Those are all built-in articles. Once you choose the type, then you can choose a garment category in the case of the ladies. So you can choose one of these 5 different types for ladies. And then you can further drill down to choose backs and fronts. So the built-in articles are available to you, but you can also create a custom article. And there is a video in version 9 software and also posted on YouTube about how to add a custom article. Now, it only gives you one way to add that custom article. There are other ways, and I'm going to cover those other ways today. So when you save an article as a custom article, you access it not through the factory article, but through the custom article. And then you browse to the location where you saved that design. And once you bring it in, or that image, that is not a design. Once you bring it in, you just click OK, and then it's in the background for you to start your design. So just as a reminder, when you scan in something to use in the software, you have the choice, as long as you have Designer Plus, to save it as a custom article. Or if you have creator level, you can insert the image into the software as an artwork backdrop. If you have creator level, you can only do this second type. If you have Designer Plus, you can do either. The steps involved in scanning depend on which method you're going to choose. So I've got an outline of the steps in the next slide. And your first step is to either scan or screen capture the item. Then you straighten it if it's needed. And if you are meticulous about scanning straight, you can skip that step. Then you crop it. You can trace the image. If you're going to save it as an article, that's best to trace the image. But if you're going to just bring it in as a backdrop, you can skip that step. You resize the item as it's needed so that it will really function a lot better to give you a better idea if you're going to need to resize the design that you bring in. And then you save it. And in terms of saving, it's only necessary for articles or backdrops that you wish to recall later. Saving isn't necessary if you're just bringing it in as a one-off. So if you're just going to use it for that one particular design, it's not necessary to save that. But if you want to recall it later, either to use as a backdrop or an article, you will want to save that resized image. So I'm going to focus on scanning first. So that's the first step. And you will need to smooth out the item as much as possible and press it if it's needed. So if you're using a garment or if you're using a pattern piece as an image in the background, you will need to make sure it is not wrinkled. You want to try to scan straight, and I just use the edge of my scanner bed to scan straight. You also want to scan at 100% size, and I generally set my resolution at 200 to 300. It doesn't have to be a high resolution of 600 in order to scan. So 200 to 300 usually works. Now, in terms of color or black or white, we have choices in how we scan. Color is helpful if you're scanning a colored item, and it's helpful for picking out thread colors, for example. So if you've got an actual photograph of a garment that you bring in, or if you have a screen capture from a catalog, it's helpful to scan in color. If you are using a black and white or grayscale image, then I would set my scanner at the black and white. And scanner software will vary, so you'll have to look at your scanning software to determine how you set these different things. Now, in terms of what can be imported, you can, and whether you're doing these as an article or a backdrop, you have all these options. You can do a pattern drawing, an actual garment, a magazine or a catalog picture, a hand sketch, or a pattern piece. So let's look at some of these different options. The line drawing, in this case from the pattern, would be very easy to use. It's very clean, cut, precise, and this would be fine to use versus the sketch that is shown on the front of the pattern. And some patterns have very clear line drawings. These are drawn to scale, so that is very helpful when you are working out the proportions to put a design on your pattern. And by the way, for all these examples, I've used garments as examples, but you can easily scan in something from Home Deck, a Home Deck pattern, a piece from a tote bag, for example, or a craft item. I'm using garments because they present usually the largest challenges. So that's why it's only garments. Now, this is an old pattern. I think you can probably tell. And so you have the choice of using a drawing or a pattern piece when you work with a pattern. The older patterns had more detailed drawings. And so in this case, when you're trying to decide, do I use the drawing or do I use a pattern piece, the pattern piece is going to be better. And these are from the directions. They always give the layout of all the different pattern pieces. And sometimes this is easier to scan these in and use as a background image rather than trying to scan in the pattern piece because they're smaller and it's easier to use these. Now in this next one, this is also an old pattern, but it is a very simple drawing. And here you could use that drawing or you could use one of the pattern pieces. Now, in scanning in an actual garment, you have to think about, will that garment fit on my scanner bed? And if you only have an 8.5 by 11 scanner bed, it's kind of hard to get that actual garment unless you're working with a baby item, which this is a baby item. So baby items are easy to do. For other items, it depends on where you have to place the design or where you're thinking about placing the design, and how large of an area you need to capture. So scanning at 100% is important if you want to skip that resizing step. And it's always best to check the accuracy of your final scan before you go to the next step of inserting the design and then deciding if it needs to be resized. So remember, you have a measurement tool in the software that's in the view menu, or you can access with that with the M on your keyboard as a shortcut key. And when you are using the measurement tool, you click on one side of the garment or item you're scanning in and drag to the other side, and that gives you the measurement. And then you can check the accuracy of your scan with the actual garment by taking a tape measure and measuring that garment in the same place. With actual garments, it's easy to scan in collars and cuffs and pockets, and you can get an accurate reading for that. And then you can use the Open Object tool in the software to just trace around the edge of that collar, and then you can accurately place a design on that collar. Now, when you're using, say, two scans placed together, here it's important to mark the center in some way. And if you're doing a neckline, you will mark the center. And that way, when you're aligning those scans, you can use the mark to make sure that you've got them together. I'll be doing a demonstration on a pattern piece that gives you this same process. So in this case, I scanned one side of the garment with the pin in it, then I scanned the other side, because again, when you work with ready to wear, you can't necessarily assume that both pieces, both sides, are absolutely symmetric. So in this case, it's best to scan both sides and then you put both sides together. Now, if you want to take a picture of the entire garment, you can do a web capture or take a photograph of the actual garment, and you'll place the garment on the floor, smooth it out. You need to take the picture directly overhead or there's going to be distortion. So when you do this, generally a ladder is involved, so you want to make sure that you're careful when you do this. But it is possible to capture that entire garment, and then you have to resize whether you use a webcam or a camera to capture the garment, because it's not going to be in 100% scale. Then if you're using a magazine or catalog picture that you either scan in or you can do screen captures from a website, these are easy things to capture. It can be difficult when you're placing designs on these types of captures, depending on the angle the model is. So, for example, this head-on shot is going to be much easier to add a design to than this, where the model is turned. And it depends on where you're going to place your design. But it is very helpful if you do purchase an item from a catalog, that you can kind of pre-plan your design while you are waiting for the garment to be received. Now, a very crude way is to do a sketch, and if sometimes it's the only way. You want to make sure that you draw to proportion, so measure the article and use graph paper and get as accurate as you can, and then you can calculate and resize that hand sketch. As far as pattern pieces, you can scan in the entire piece like a collar, or you can scan in a key area of a pattern piece where you're going to add designs. You want, as I mentioned earlier, you want to press the pattern piece. And in the case of a white pattern, make sure you place a colored paper behind it, and it will show the edges much better. This is also an old pattern. I think you can probably tell, because it's only a single size. Single sizes are much easier to put together because you only have that one seam line to align. When you're using a multiple size pattern, it does get a little bit harder. But this is a small neckline, and it's easy to pin the pattern pieces together. And if I wanted to add a design around the edge of the neckline, it's going to be much easier with a single size pattern. When you have multiple sizes, it's best to kind of crudely mark the seam allowance, and that way it'll remind you that to place the designs that you're going to add at an appropriate place, because it isn't marked on a multiple size pattern. You want to once you scan in one side, you can crop the one side and then make a copy and flip it over, and that way you have the entire neckline to plan. When you're thinking about adding a design, it's best to think about where you're going to add that to the pattern or whatever you're constructing. So you want to align that area with the scanner edge. It makes it easier to straighten and then match up the pattern pieces. So in the case of this pattern where the design is going to go, it's larger, I couldn't do it in one scan. So I wanted to align the shoulder seams with the scanner. So the pattern pieces were placed in the scanning bed so that the shoulder seam, rather than the center front, aligned with the edge of the scanner. That made it easier to put these two pieces together than to put the design around from center front to center back. So always give thought to where that design is going to go, and align the edge of the pattern piece or garment or tote bag or whatever with the scanner edge, and it just makes it much easier. Now, if you're doing pattern pieces that are going to go across an area that doesn't exactly fit together flat, just pin it in the key area where the design is going to be placed. So if I had a design that I was doing that was going to go from the front of this across the sleeve seam, I would pin this together as flat as possible in this area. Now, it's impossible to get it totally flat, but for the purposes of planning, it will at least give you a guideline for how to resize that design and place the design so that it's smooth, that it goes across your shoulder area smoothly. Now, our second step is, okay, I scanned crooked, and it may be just a little off, and this basically depends on how particular you are about your scan. You can, in the embroidery side of the canvas, you can straighten a crooked scan I usually pull in a guideline by clicking on the ruler and dragging it down, and then I bring it down to the edge of the pattern piece, and then access my rotate handles, and I can rotate so that the edge, that straight edge, aligns with my guideline. That's the way you would align in embroidery canvas. In artwork canvas, if you wish to align in artwork canvas, there is a straighten image, and it is under bitmap, and it's called straighten image, and it will open up this dialog box, and then you can align, in this case it's the center back, with the, make it parallel to one of the grid lines, and that way you can straighten the image. Then you also need to crop that image, and some scanning software will crop the image, and I'll show you in a minute how I do it in mine. You can also do it in artwork canvas, embroidery canvas, or in Corel Draw. So in scanning software, mine works just like it does in Corel Draw. I double click on my scan, and then I can bring in these control points so that it aligns with my cropped piece. Now, this only works if you scan straight. So again, that first step in order to crop it in scanning software is very critical that you scan straight, because in most scanning software, you can't rotate 1 degree at a time. You rotate in 90 degrees. So In that case, you could not crop in your scanning software, but there are other options, of course. In Embroidery Canvas, we can crop through Auto Digitize toolbox. And when you select crop, you have options for cropping. I usually do the rectangle crop for pattern pieces that I crop. And you just click and drag over the artwork. Now, I do generally add a guideline here. Again, by clicking on the ruler, that's going to add a guideline. And it helps me click and drag accurately over my pattern or my garment or whatever I'm cropping. The disadvantage of doing this in embroidery software is that you cannot adjust the crop. So if you crop incorrectly, you have to do undo and then crop it again. So in Artwork Canvas, you have the advantage of being able to adjust your crop. So this, I've switched over to Artwork Canvas. I've chosen the crop, which is down underneath your text tool. And I click and drag over the image. And then I can take those control handles and adjust the control handles. And then double click to set the crop, or you can check this crop green check mark, and that will crop the image. Now, step 4 is tracing an article. This has to be done in Artwork Canvas. And what this is doing, it's taking that bitmap image, whether it's a pattern piece or an actual scan of the item, and it is actually vectorizing the image. And when you vectorize the image, you can reduce the colors, you can delete segments that can't be selected and then deleted from the group. And you can, by the way, you might want to change the group there to cropped away. That should be cropped away, not grouped away. Didn't catch that when I was proofreading. And then you can also vectorize an image to remove the white background of the image. So reducing the colors will simplify the image that you have. And you, when you vectorize an image, because you can't ungroup a bitmap, you have to select bits and pieces of the vector image to delete. And in the video that is part of the software, I explain how you ungroup the vector image and select items that you want to delete. So that's explained in the video that's part of the software. And then if we either use an item, an image as a backdrop, you don't have the option of removing the white background because the white background exists on a bitmap. Even if we use a transparent background, the white background shows in Embroidery Canvas. So if you want to have that white background that is part of your bitmap totally gone, the image has to be turned into a vector image. And I'm going to give you an example of this when we work in the software. So you have options of tracing. There are many different ways to trace, and trace image is found in Artwork Canvas. You can do a quick trace, but if you choose center line, you have 2 choices. And if you have an outline trace, you have 6 choices. So lots of different choices. And I want to first talk about a black and white image. When you work with a black and white image, it's best that this is a grayscale image. You have to turn it into a black and white image usually in order to get a successful trace. So you first go to bitmap, convert to bitmap, and then you choose black and white. And that's done before it's traced. And here I chose center line tracing and did a line drawing. And you can see I have a very straightforward, simple image that I can use in the background for designing. Another way you can trace an image for use as an article, you can use outline and clip art. So again, this is another method of tracing. And you can see it got rid of some of these details when it's traced, but you don't need all those details for planning and sizing your garment. Now, if after I trace this, if I want to get rid of those little bits and pieces, all I have to do is ungroup the design and select them and delete. Again, the video that is part of the software goes into detail about how to get rid of those bits and pieces. Now, I can also use Quick Trace, and the advantage of Quick Trace is you don't have to convert the bitmap. It just, for very simple images, it works great. And then I have this image that I can quickly ungroup and delete the parts that I don't want. Now, if you're doing colored images, this, again, I used the outline trace and clip art. And you can actually go into the color tab and reduce colors. This didn't, this had maybe 7 or 8 colors when I traced it, maybe even more than that. I can't remember for sure, but you can reduce colors by merging, much the same way you merge in auto digitizing. Now, your next step is to resize the article, and you can easily access your calculator on your computer screen. You will measure the scan, then you measure the actual size of the garment, and you calculate the percent that you will know. That way you know how to change the size of that article. So the calculation is, in this particular image, I measured the shoulders and I use the measurement tool. You have choices. You can switch back to embroidery canvas and use the measuring tool. I use the parallel dimension tool. You measure across the shoulders and you record that. You want to also measure the actual garment. We're going to actually work through this. But before we get into the actual scanning and bringing in the different pictures and using them as articles or as backdrops, I want to go over a couple of other placement options for you. And these, one of these is the layout toolbox, and the other is to just draw the item in the software. So I did a webinar last year on layout toolbox, and you can use the layout for square shapes, rectangular shapes, or circle shapes. So remember that you always can use the layout toolbox in order to plan and design your designs and for embroidery. So if you are interested in that webinar, just go to Learn and Create the recorded webinars, and it's called Plan Your Project in the software. Another way is to just draw the shape of an object. So if you're doing a simple shape, and particularly if you're using a home dec item, you can just use the drawing tools in the software and either outline them or fill them. And for example, the oval, you can't use an oval shape in layout toolbox, so you can draw an oval. And remember to lock those designs in the background, and then you can insert the design that you want to use. I want to talk a minute about placement of designs before we work in the software. You have printed templates, you can measure the article, you have placement lines, you have absolute check, and you have pinpoint placement, all different ways to make sure that that design goes exactly where you want it. So when you print a template from the software, generally you can use that template to place it on the item, decide where you want it, and mark the center of the design using the template, and then align the design with the design center when it's sent to the hoop. You can, if you're using an article, you can press the, first of all, you want to be in design view, so press the T on the keyboard and then press the M on the keyboard and measure from, say, the center neck down to the center of the design, and that will give you the actual length. Then you measure on your on-screen article to locate the design center. And then again, when the design is sent to the machine, use your move motif and align the design with the center. By the way, if you are interested, if you would be interested in a follow-up webinar in terms of placing designs, I'm only going to lightly touch on it. So if you need more detail about that, if you let me know in the chat, that would help. Or if you have any other ideas about what you would like to see in the way of a webinar, please indicate in the chat what you would like to have. And another way is placement lines. And here I'm using the pattern piece, and I digitize with the Open Object tool along the neckline. And then I have to move that placement line in first position. And then with absolute check, of course, it's very critical that you be sure and hoop straight. So you want to make sure your garment or your item is hoop straight, and you can use this center mark to align your designs. Remember, with absolute check, you touch the screen in different spots on the design, and that will check for the placement of the design. Now, pinpoint placement is a little bit different in absolute check, because you have 2 points to align, and then the design will actually rotate to as you designate those on your machine screen. Haley did a wonderful webinar called Beginner Embroidery on Garments. If you want to know more about pinpoint placement, again, it's Learn and Create webinars, recorded webinars, embroidery in software, and then look for the Beginner Embroidery on Garments. So she has some great tips in that video, or in that lesson. So our lesson is going to be 4 short mini lessons. So I'm going to start out with something easy, and that's just using a custom article. And then we'll progress from there. So when you use a custom article, you go to Design and Background and Display Colors, place a dot in front of Factory Article, and then choose your article. For this, I'm going to do the ladies sweatshirt, and I'm going to use the back. So just keep scrolling and choosing those. And we're going to use this color. And so you just click on the drop-down arrow, choose the color, and then click OK. Now, I want to see the entire article, so I can go up to the zoom and select to article. The hoop is placed in the center of the back, and I want to insert a design. So I'm going to insert embroidery. And this is actually in the Celebrations and Seasons, and it's HD 441. Remember, you do get a preview of the design before you bring it in. And I'm going to click on Open, and it does go to the center of the hoop, but all you have to do is click and drag and move it up to the approximate location. Check the X position, make sure it is, when you click and drag, you can get it off kilter. So you want to make sure that the X is at 0. Now, this obviously is a little bit too small for the back of this, so we can edit this design by resizing it. I want to call attention to the stitch count on the lower right of the screen. So it's 15,738. What I'm going to do is go up to my width and just start playing with proportions. And I ended up doing 175%. And my numlock must be off, so let me activate that. There we go, and I'll press enter. Now, you can't do this with every design. And I want to point out, it's always important to look at the art grade. Using a pure art design gives you freedom to increase designs to this size. And you can see that the stitch count increased to 28,000. So remember to always check your art grade. Another thing I did was change the hoop, and just to remind you, you right click on the hoop and it fits in the large oval, but I want to do the midi. That gives me more play when I send the design to the machine. You can also adjust for fabric. That's in the handout, and all the steps are in the handout to do that. Remember, when you adjust for fabric, that also adjusts the stitch count and makes that fabric or that design appropriate for embroidering on that type of fabric. Now let's talk about resizing this sweatshirt to fit your sweatshirt, actual sweatshirt. So the first thing I'm going to do is activate the measurement tool, and I'm going to click from one shoulder to the next. And so let's say this was, I think I measured 15. Let's say it measures 15. We're going to round up. And here's when I would activate my calculator. And if I need 16.5, that's what my actual sweatshirt measured. I divide that by 15 and I get 1.1. Now this is not the exact sample that I used in the handout, but whatever your sweatshirt measures, that's how you calculate. Then you take that times 100, and that means you need to increase that article to 110. So to do that, I go back into my design and background and change the scale to 110 and press enter and click OK. And the sweatshirt increased in size. And then you can make an accurate decision. Is that design the right size for my size of sweatshirt? And then you can save the design and send it to the machine. The next example, I want to actually use a pattern piece. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to click on Insert Artwork, and I navigate to the location of my pattern, my safe scan. And I'm going to hide this. This is cropped, but remember to review what I told you in the slide about going to crop background and dragging the box, or you can crop in Artwork Canvas, either way. But let's say I wanted to design around this entire neckline. So in order to get this, I've already cropped, it's already straight. I'm going to copy, and I'm going to paste, and then I'm going to mirror that. And I can use my arrow keys to bring that copy over, or I can click and drag, and then I can align those two pattern pieces. And I hold the control key down to select both and go to the arrange, and then I can align bottom. And I may need to move that over a little bit, but I can use my arrow key to fine tune that. And then you're ready to start designing. So when I do this and I'm bringing it in as a backdrop in this case, I'm not making an article, I'm just making a backdrop. It's a good idea to right click and lock those so you don't accidentally click and drag. I cannot select those. Remember, an article can't be selected, but a backdrop can. So you want to make sure and go through that process. And then you insert your design and plan your design. Now, I have created a design already, so I'm just going to navigate to the location of that to insert it. Since this webinar isn't about editing and designing, it's on articles and placement line, I'm not going to go into the details of how this design was created. But I did give you the file number on the handout if you wish to use that. So here is the design, and I can bring that in, and then I move it in place. And here is when I would use I want to make sure that my pattern piece is in aligned, so I'm going to have to, or it isn't aligned with the center of the hoop, so I'm just going to have to visually center this. Okay, so I want to make sure that it's placed in the proper position below what would be the stitching line for this neckline. I can then go to my digitized toolbar, select the open object. I want a contrast color, and I'm going to click around the neckline. It's best to activate the hoop to make sure that you are not outside the hoop when you add your design and placement line, obviously. But I'm just doing right and left clicks around that line and then pressing enter. I can reshape this line through the reshape tool if I need to make it more accurate. In this case, I could use the mega hoop, and I want to show that hoop. And then of course I need to rotate it. So I'll come up here, and in version 9, we don't have to go to the multi-hoop toolbox to rotate. We can do it right here in the transform toolbar. And you can see everything is going to fit inside the hoop. That is the center of the hoop. It's not part of the design. I'm going to select my placement line and move it to the beginning. The last thing I want to show you is tracing a black and white image. And in this case, I will go to I can insert the artwork either in this side of the software or the artwork canvas. And then I'm going to switch to artwork canvas. You can see this is very tiny. When I switch to artwork canvas, if I press F4, it shows in large size. And for this, I'm just going to do a quick trace. So this is looking at all the lines, and it's changing that bitmap image into a vector image. Now, I'm going to go to the object docker, and this is the PNG for this particular article. It's the bitmap image. I don't want that, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to ungroup all. And this gives me, if the layer's collapsed, you have to open up the layer, remember that. So you click on that arrow. I love this about version 9 and the new Corel SE. I can easily tell what is in the backdrop. This is the rectangle backdrop that you find in bitmap images. This is the white background that would be in the image if I didn't delete it. I can press delete to get rid of that. And then I can select this all, and I want to group it. Now I can switch over. I can either measure this in artwork canvas, and I do give you directions for measuring an artwork canvas, but we're going to go ahead and switch over to embroidery canvas, because I'm going to show you how to measure in embroidery canvas, and then we'll save this as an article. Now you notice that it's not showing. Remember, you have show vector artwork, and you have to have it activated in order to see that artwork. It is not sized right now. So I'm going to press the M on my keyboard, and I'm going to measure from shoulder to shoulder, and it's roughly 1.55. That's what I'll use for the calculation. And I'll activate my calculator. I need to divide the 15 by 1.55 and then multiply times 100. So it actually needs to be 968% larger than it is. So I can't edit this in embroidery canvas. So I have to switch back over to artwork canvas to do this. And so I'm going to select my design, and I did not write down the percent, but which I should have. I believe it was about 900 and let's say 60. But whatever you calculated. Actually, let me show you this, because this is kind of cool what you can do. Let me bring back the calculator. I'm having trouble getting my calculator out there. It is. Okay. multiply this times 100. Okay, now let me copy this. I'll come over here and paste it and press enter, and then press F4. So now I have my resized garment that is going to correspond to the size that I need it to be when I save it as an article. So to save this as an article, I'm going to do File, Export, because I'm not going to use this as a design. It needs to be an image. And I'm going to, what I do is I'll go to my C drive and users, public pictures. I go to Bernina 9 pictures, and I've created a custom article folder. You click on new folder, call this custom article. And then I'm going to save this. The file type, I want to do PNG. So I'm going to look for PNG. That gives you a transparent background. That's why you choose that. And then click on export. A dialog box opens up, and you click OK. It's now a custom article. You can delete that. And you would find that by going to Design, Background and Display, Custom Articles. You browse to the location. I've saved that folder in my custom article file. And there it is. When I open it and click OK, it is now an article that can be used in the background to plan my design. You cannot color in custom articles on this side of the software. You would have to do that when it's a vector image in Artwork Canvas. I realize that this has been a longer webinar than usual. There was a lot to cover, but I'm happy to go a little bit longer if it's okay with Emily. I'm ready to address questions.
Hey, Debbie, we do just have one question so far. Let me turn my camera on. I'm over there. Hey, everybody. We had a question. Can you use articles in the DesignWorks software as well?
You would bring them in as an image, and there's no way to lock them, but you could certainly go through the process of developing the sizing, and anything that you export through Artwork Canvas can be brought into DesignWorks. So it is possible.
That's very good to know. Okay, let's see. Everybody is asking about your calculator, so I believe the calculator is just on Debbie's Windows computer.
I have a calculator key on my keyboard, and if you don't have a key, it's found in accessories. So just go to your program files, and you can look up accessories, and you find the calculator that way. Or I can type it in, and it will bring it up. It's an app that you have.
Awesome. Everybody always needs a calculator. Okay. Okay, we have a question from Cindy. So if I add a background, it comes in centered. How do I place my embroidery design to the side rather than the center of the article?
Okay, if you want to, again, this might go to meeting slide that gets in my way and interferes with my screen. So you can go into your hoop by right-clicking on your hoop and set, just turn it on manual, and that way a design. Let's say I insert. I'm getting an echo. If I insert that design, I can move it wherever I want to, and it will stay because I've unchecked that automatic centering.
Awesome. Okay. And just to let everybody know, the webinar was recorded today. It'll probably be on YouTube later this afternoon, and then it will be on bernina.com along with the handouts. If you haven't downloaded those now, go ahead and try that. It'll be in a few days. Let's see. Debbie wants to know, what printer scanner do you use at home? I'm in the market to buy a new one.
Okay, yeah, I've been reading this in one of the groups. There's been a lot of information or questions about printers and scanners. I have an HP. I've had HP printers for a number of years, but I've been hearing good things about Epson printers too.
We have one of those.
Yeah, so I would check around if you're a member of the group, either one of the groups, either the Digitizing Divas or the Bernina Land software group. Ask, because I'm only one opinion. I'm okay with my scanner. The previous scanner I had, or printer scanner, was a little bit more powerful. It was also an HP, so there are things that I want to be able to do with my software that my scanning software that I can't do that I could do. I would just check around, ask people, go in and get some demos on scanners at your computer shop.
Okay. We had another question come in. I have the new V9 software, and I feel like it's taking much longer to save when I have an image included. Could this be something that maybe there's just a lot of windows open, or the size of the file that she's working in?
It's probably the size of the file more than anything, unless it's critical to keep that image along with your design. If you've got it saved somewhere on your computer, like for example, if I wanted to save that pattern piece, I can save that outside the software. And even after I duplicated it and mirrored it and aligned it, I can, as long as I go to Artwork Canvas and export that image as a JPEG, I don't have to go through those steps all the time. And I don't have to save it as an article, although I could have saved that pattern piece as an article. So there's no critical need that an image is saved with the software or with the design that was created in. I really haven't noticed it takes longer to save, but I'll kind of be more in tune to that and see.
Okay. And it looks like everybody is excited about printers. So, and then they let us also know, Debbie, that I will pass this on to you, all the suggestions that you wanted for future webinars. Also, if you have any ideas, let Debbie know, let myself know, and I think we're going to end for today, and thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you on a future Bernina of America webinar. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone.